The wonderful thing about Lapwing, Hannah Copley's book, is that it's this. I came across this wonderful Greek word translated as melapoia, which is the pushing of language towards the state of music. And that's what this book is. This is the pushing. I like that word pushing there. The pushing of language towards the state of music. And it's the music of language. It's language as a kind of nuanced bird song, if you like. It's memory, bird song as a kind of healing. It's the lapwing as every bird, as every person, so that when you look up and see a lapwing, you are seeing a poem in flight, and there's much more to it than that. And the way that it fits, the way the idea of the lapwing fits the poem so perfectly. And I was trying to think of a kind of metaphor for that, of how it fits so well. And the other day, I was playing with my little grandson Louis, and for some reason, he'd forced a toy rhinoceros into a teapot, and I thought that's the opposite of Hannah Copley's poems. You know, that she... Louis said, "What are you talking about, Grandad?" I said, what I'm talking about is this book of poems here, because the rhino felt odd in the teapot, whereas the lapwing doesn't feel odd in this book, because the lapwing in this book can do anything you want it to, unlike the rhino in the teapot. Hannah Copley.
A rhino in a teapot. Thank you, Ian. It's probably one of the most surreal things is being on the other side of an Ian McMillan introduction, which is really special. Thank you to everyone that's made this evening happen. It is a slightly terrifying joy to be up here tonight. Lapwing is a poetic biography of the bird, and it's a sequence of voices and bird songs and calls and sounds. But at its heart are two searching voices and overlapping figures that never quite meet. There's Lapwing, the title figure of this book, who is charming and migratory, but also troubled and mercurial and endangered and under threat by forces outside and inside. And then there is Lapwing's daughter, Pete, who is grounded and grieving and in pursuit of trying to pin this flitting figure down. And I'm going to read kind of the two voices as they interlock within the book. We start, Lapwing has gone missing, and we start trying to find. Description. Last seen in his winter plumage, black and white from a safe distance, metallic olive at close range. Undertail coverts rufous, cinnamon-tinged, thin legs of bright red flesh, almost raw-looking. Often mistaken for hoopoe, which riles him. Black pectoral band, white flank, with a dark ring of color beneath each eye, the thickness of paint. Longest feather of his crest once boasted at 4 inches. Wings an iridescent green, seen only when flying away. We'll go by peewit, plover, chewit, lapwinker, peat, toppy, kievit, lapwinker, pater, vanalis, Philippine. Is that all? Just that everything he says sounds like a question. Lapwing, 12. Otherwise known as a law unto himself, Lapwing. Such intellect, such grace, such promise, that killer voice, the kind of reedy tenor tipsy birds can't help but fall for at a house party, at picnics and evening jam sessions. A clutch of partners, of habitats, otherwise known as a mosaic. Pete, otherwise known as itchy feet, otherwise known as wind change, as vagrant, as story keeper. Migration offers endurance, novelty, otherwise known as the hard-won maintenance of a myth, as survival, dissemblance as another breed of song. So this book is a study of lapwing birds, but it's also a look at addiction too, and the ways that we all have our own creaturely behaviour, and the ways that we all dissemble in order to survive, and how addiction can vanish a life. On the difficulty of care. They once found him lulled beneath the concrete base of the pylon, raggedy feather rucked in leaf mould and mess, smell of abandoned nest caught in the grass, green feather almost a pure dull, Pete leaning in close enough to hear his heart's violent thrum against the steady gust of each commuter. Lapwing, otherwise known as Chewit, remains where he tucks, body ringed by the offerings of his brood. Proffered cranefly, larvae, a dozen wetland mollusks rotting into a single organism. Slug bloated and floating backwards in the waterlogged rut. Indifference, otherwise justified as the quick nipping of pain in the bud, pulls her to a safe distance. Let the pylon loom, she thinks. Let him kite himself across this metal nation. Let the A-road keep us forever severed. A safe acreage between them. Let him fashion his own flight home. Let him disintegrate. Love held in leagues, love wrapped in steel and power cables, love in concrete wings. To study lapwings is to study destruction and violence and the ways that we can wreak havoc on ourselves and habitats and the world around us. Family tree. One cousin exploded while breaking in the Falkland Islands. Another settled in Pennsylvania. One more to Vancouver, lovely part of the world to lay a clutch. 25 close relations hammered to death in a storm somewhere between Dover and Bhutan. 12 starved near Morecambe, 2 ancient friends in southern France, 7 shorn to straw in Norfolk, 49 eggs picked off in 2 hours in Friesland, 7 shot in Newfoundland, 1 son mislaid. The entire brood eaten in Hertfordshire, 1 ex-girlfriend roosting somewhere in Kent. Thank you to Pavilion and to Darren Rhys-Jones for supporting this book, and thank you to my fellow readers for beautiful performances. I'm going to end where I began, asking that question of, is that all? I think when you're grieving, you're never really finished, are you? Is that all? And she remembers his stories. Lapwing, quenched, slowly tumbling from high singularity into the scrape of his thoughts. Thirst and craving grounded into a fuzzed eloquence, panicked peas weep weep softening into prose. Here is something to feather. This pulls skywards towards a coded vagary, the willingness to come down from a high place tied to a sliding scale of need. Each morning, the same boorish dogs, the same dull threat of obliteration, her granted wildness cordoned into a neat rectangle. She is done with this wintering, ready for the earth to give, poised to scratch for a more tender language. Thank you.